Hey, my name is Matthias with John Chipalones, and today we're in Broomall at a recent oil to gas conversion. They had put a recent gas line on the street, so the homeowner has been on oil for a long time and they were interested in switching to gas. We're gonna go talk to Rosemary, but before that, I wanted to thank our installers. We had Vince, Gene, Mark, and Larry on this job. Wouldn't have been able to do it without them, so I wanted to thank those guys. And let's go talk to Rosemary, come on. So we're here with Rosemary and Ruby Ann. We installed a gas furnace in Rosemary's house. We went from oil to gas. You've been a customer for 29 years. And tell me a little bit about how the origin of working with us, how did that start?
Since 1996, I've been a customer because I had experience when I moved in here, when my mom passed away, all my components went within a couple years of each other, but I had you.
You had oil for a long time in here. There was gas in the street. I think in the last couple of years they put gas lines out in the street. Can you tell me a little bit about the hesitancy? Where did it come from, as well as what finally made you make the decision to go to gas?
Well, I think the hesitancy came from, like hearing stories and even seeing things on TV where, people had the gas and the house exploded, and I don't like change, so I've been used to oil. Talking to you, even like talking to them, and then I think I kind of decided, but then I was still kind of like, if you remember when I was talking to you and you came and you kept saying, you're gonna love it. You're just gonna love it. The decision was hard, but I'm glad that I did it because I love the fact that the oil tank is out of there. There seems to be more room in the basement. That's why I'm glad that even though you're oil people, you can take care of my gas stuff too.
So we're here in the basement in Rosemary's house. Here's the gas hot water heater we put in. We ran a new gas line into the house. Pico hooked up a meter outside. You have the gas line coming in over here. You have an individual line going down to the gas hot water heater. There's another line going to the furnace over here. We put a carrier furnace in. There was a carrier oil furnace here before. It is a high efficiency furnace, so it vents out the side of the building. Instead of using the chimney, it's going to be higher efficiency. It's also going to provide the homeowner with more comfort itself. We put a really nice air cleaner on here. These are fantastic air cleaners as far as keeping the house clean, keeping the system clean, and you only change them about once or twice a year. We also put an April air humidifier on here. In the winter time, these are going to provide humidity into the house. It's going to make the homeowner feel much more comfortable, and it also helps lower energy bills because your body feels more comfortable with more humidity in the airstream itself. And then on the back end, back here, we have a UV light. UV lights are a great thing to add to HVAC systems because they prevent mold. This is actually UV light, and it also has a carbon cell on it that helps clean the airstream. So not only is it attacking mold, but it's also helping clean the air throughout the house, giving a much cleaner environment to the actual client itself. So you mentioned you love the decision going to gas, right? Were there a couple of other changes that you noticed with the system that was in here, kind of whether it's comfort, whether it's the thermostat, what are some of the biggest comfort things you noticed change with?
Well, the one thing I noticed is like a little bit more noise in here that you can't even tell that anything's on. My other system, I always had it like at 70, like in the winter time, and then sometimes it got really, on those days when it's damp, the rain, I would turn it up to 71, 72. This I have kept at 68 since I got it. Like the thermostat, it said at 68, and there's times when I'll look at it and it says 67, and then you told me it's because it has a sensitive, that it knows, that nobody's here or thinks nobody's here. And I found out after you told me that, if I walk by it, next thing you know, the heater comes on. I mean, that's another good thing, that if it feels like if nobody's here, it doesn't heat it up to 68. So that's a savings, you know.
What was the installation process like?
You coordinated that you knew it was going to take 2 days, you know, and you had Pico come, the second day. I knew you guys were going to do a, good job. But there was very little noise. Like all your guys just seemed to work together. Everything just, it just went smoothly.
Hey, been a customer for 29 years, so, we try to do whatever we can to, say thank you. Hey, thanks for checking out our video. If you think a system like this would be a good fit for your home, give us a call or check us out online. Thanks.